The sky over Red Rock, Wyoming had never looked so cruel. Thunder growled like a dying beast, and wind ripped through the town like it was tearing pages from an old history book. Trees cracked, tin roofs flew like angry birds. The streets turned to rivers. In the span of 2 hours, a quiet little town was reduced to a broken, soaked skeleton. By morning, most folks had packed their bags or started loading trucks. There were no more prayers, just insurance calls and moving vans, but Clint Eastwood stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he couldn't leave a town that had once whispered to him when the world had gone loud. Red Rock had. Never asked him for much, just peace. A place where no one cared about headlines or Hollywood or the gun on his belt. Just a man, a ranch, and the sound of boots on dusty wood. He owed it something. So, when the storm passed and the church steeple was leaning sideways, when the cafe windows were shattered and the gas station roof looked like a peeled tin can, Clint stood on Main Street with a hammer in one hand and a shovel in the other. The mayor had already left. The sheriff's badge was sitting on an empty desk. The preacher was on the next bus to Cheyenne, but Clint Eastwood? He was boarding up the schoolhouse with calloused hands. People watched him from windows, quietly, ashamed almost. They saw in him something they'd forgotten existed, resolve without reward. "Ain't much left," a young mechanic mumbled. On day 2, Clint didn't stop hammering. "There's still dirt under our feet, son. That's enough to stand on." The story of what Clint did next wouldn't make national news, but in Red Rock, it would be remembered like scripture. The wind had calmed, but the silence it left behind was worse. Red Rock felt abandoned, like a memory people had stopped bothering to remember. Stores stayed dark, the schoolyard sat empty. The church bell hung like a broken tooth, silent and crooked, but every morning, before the sun had fully cleared the hills, Clint Eastwood was out there, sleeves rolled, jaw set, moving. Rubble with the kind of patience only a man who's seen too much can muster. He didn't give speeches. He didn't pass blame, he just worked. On the 3rd day, he lifted the fallen porch beams off of the old librarian's house. She hadn't asked, no one had. But when she stepped outside and saw her front steps clear for the first time since the storm, she put her hand to her mouth and whispered, "God bless that man." On the 5th day, he nailed a new plank across the schoolhouse door. A kid, no older than 10, rode past on a bike with training wheels and stopped to watch. Clint didn't say anything, just nodded once. The kid stared like he was looking at a statue, then quietly set down his bike and asked, "Can I help?" Clint handed him a nail. That night, the boy's father, a contractor who hadn't touched a hammer since the storm, showed up with tools. By the end of the week, 5 more men joined Clint, not because he asked, he never did, but because watching him reminded them of who they used to be before fear and failure made them run. "You always this stubborn?" one of them asked as they rebuilt the diner roof. Clint didn't stop working. "No, just tired of watching strong men walk away from what matters." It wasn't just the buildings that were coming back. It was the pride, the decency, the glue that held the town together long before the power lines were strung. And though Clint never said it aloud, he wasn't building Red Rock back the way it was. He was building it better. By the 10th day, Red Rock was no longer silent. Hammers echoed through the valley. Children were back in the streets, even if the swings still creaked and the sidewalks were cracked. Windows shone. Smoke curled from chimneys again. Life, once frozen by fear, had started to move, but something else arrived. 2. A dusty red pickup rolled into town just before dusk. The tires kicked up familiar grit, and when the driver stepped out, Clint didn't have to look twice. Earl Watkins? Name Clint hadn't spoken in over 20 years. The last time they met, Clint had blood on his shirt and a scar forming above his right eye. Thanks to Earl, they'd been on opposite sides of a war that didn't make the newspapers. And when the dust settled back then, Earl had taken something that wasn't his and left Clint for dead. Now, here he was, older, slower, wearing the same crooked smile. "Heard this town got kicked in the teeth," Earl said, adjusting his hat. "Figured maybe I could lend a hand." Clint didn't respond at first, just stared. "Ain't here for apologies," Earl added. Ain't looking for forgiveness either. Just saw what you're doing. Figured maybe it's time I learned what it means to stay. For a long moment, silence stood between them like a drawn gun. Then Clint spoke, voice low and steady. This ain't about you, Earl, but if you're here to work, there's a roof 2 blocks down with holes bigger than your conscience. You up for that? Earl nodded slowly. I'll get started at dawn. No handshake, no grudge buried. Just dirt, tools, and time. By morning, Earl was on that roof, and Clint, though his eyes never stopped watching, said nothing. Because for him, justice wasn't about getting even. It was about building something no man could tear down again. That week, the people of Red Rock witnessed something rarer than kindness. 2 men with broken history, fixing a broken town. Together. And in those silent hours, hammering side by side, Clint realized some wounds don't need revenge. They just need to be outlived. Word spread fast. People from nearby towns started drifting into Red Rock, not just to rebuild, but to witness what they were calling the comeback no one expected. News vans came and left, disappointed when Clint refused every interview. No one could quite pin him down. He wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a mayor, he wasn't even officially in charge, but everyone followed his lead. When the city council finally returned, most of them with clean boots and wrinkled excuses, they tried to hold a public meeting to reorganize community leadership. What they found was a town already organized around Clint Eastwood. You've done a lot here, one of them said to Clint, flipping through papers. Maybe it's time we make it official, some kind of title, something people can rally behind. Clint didn't even look up from the beam he was measuring. I didn't come here to be anything but useful, he said. You want a title? Give it to the guy who shows up after the work's done. The room went quiet because deep down they knew he was right. The people weren't drawn to his name. They were drawn to his consistency, his integrity. He didn't tell them what to believe. He showed them what belief looked like in action. 1 nail, 1 board, 1 repaired soul at a time, but the weight of it all started to creep in. Clint could feel the pressure of their eyes. The kids who looked at him like he was invincible. The elders who stopped him in the street like he had answers. The exhausted workers who needed his silent nod to keep going. And one night, back at his small, weathered cabin at the edge of town, Clint sat on the porch and felt it all hit at once. The guilt, the responsibility, the pain of being needed by so many and known by so few. He looked out at the hills where the storm had rolled in weeks before, now green again, still scarred, but alive. He poured himself a small glass of bourbon, raised it to the stars, and said quietly, I didn't stay to be a hero. I stayed because somebody had to. The moonlight didn't answer, but in that moment, Clint didn't feel alone. He felt chosen, not by fate. Not by God, but by a town that had forgotten its own strength, until it saw it reflected in him. The wind shifted on the 23rd day. Hot, dry, strange. It came with the smell of smoke, faint at first like an old campfire. But by dusk, the sky was glowing orange, and panic returned like an old song everyone hoped they'd forgotten. Wildfire had sparked miles west, and it was moving fast. Officials came in from the next county over, shouting orders, drawing evacuation lines on maps. The town, still healing from the storm, suddenly felt like a battlefield again. Sirens wailed, families scrambled. Shelters overflowed, but Clint Eastwood didn't run, while others packed their trucks. He loaded barrels of water into the back of his pickup. While men shouted into walkie-talkies, he handed out soaked rags and pointed out wind directions. That church we rebuilt, he said to the contractor who now worked beside him daily, we'll lose it in an hour unless someone douses that field line. The man hesitated. Clint didn't. He jumped in the truck and drove straight toward the smoke. Fire licked the hills. Trees exploded like matchsticks. Heat blasted across the windshield like an open oven. But Clint didn't flinch. He pulled up to the chapel and worked. Alone, soaking the dry grass, creating a wet barrier, hammering sandbags around its wooden frame. His hands blistered. His lungs burned. When the flames came, they roared, angry, wild, but Clint stood between them and the town like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The fire pushed. He pushed back, and just when it seemed the chapel would catch, the winds shifted slightly, enough. Rain started to fall. Not much, but just enough. When the townspeople returned, they found Clint on the steps of the church, soot-streaked, shirt torn. Exhausted, but smiling. She held, he said, tapping the wooden door. Red Rock didn't cheer. They didn't weep. They simply stood still, honoring something beyond courage. A man who didn't save them for applause. A man who didn't leave, because leaving was never in his blood. In that smoke-soaked silence, they understood. Clint Eastwood didn't just save Red Rock from the fire. He saved it from forgetting who it was. The fire was gone. Ash hung in the air like snow, soft and quiet, hills blackened. Trees bare, but Red Rock stood. Not untouched, but unbroken. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. People stopped asking, "Who's in charge?" and started asking, "What can I do?" The mayor resigned, not in scandal but in humility. The preacher returned and found his first sermon already written in the charred footprints Clint left behind. Even Earl, the man Clint once might have buried, stayed on, hammer in hand, teaching kids how to fix what they once only feared. Clint, however, didn't stick around for speeches. He finished rebuilding the last roof, sharpened the last fence post, sat one more time on that same porch where it all began, and then left at sunrise with nothing but a rifle on his back and dust in his boots. No goodbye. No plaque. Just the silence of a man who gave everything and asked for nothing. That afternoon, the people of Red Rock gathered near the old oak tree, the one the fire hadn't touched, the one Clint had once sat beneath with a boy who offered him a nail. They raised a simple sign. No statue. No marble. Just wood burnt slightly on the edges. Carved by hand. It read, "He stayed." And beneath it, in smaller letters, because someone had to, tourists would pass through in the years to come, taking pictures and asking questions. Who was he? What did he do? Locals never gave the same answer twice. Some called him a cowboy. Some said he was a carpenter. Others called him a man who once rode in alone and left everyone standing. But those who truly knew, those whose hands had blistered beside his, whose home stood because he refused to leave, they simply said, "He was Clint, and he taught us to stay."